The New York Times reports that there was discussion of the president invoking martial law and conducting a new election under the auspices of the military. Thankfully, President Trump has denied it. You'll hear why that would be unconstitutional on The Durst Show. Today, we talk about a constitutional apocalypse. Apparently, according to the New York Times, there are reports that the president was considering, he's denied it, was considering invoking martial law and rerunning the election with guns out and the military controlling the election. We know that General Flynn, remember him, the former national security advisor who was prosecuted and then got a pardon, who's served the country greatly in the past. According to his appearance on Newsmax, Mr. Flynn pushed for Mr. Trump to impose martial law and deploy the military to rerun the election. At one point in the meeting on Friday, Mr. Trump asked about that idea. That's according to the New York Times. President Trump has denied any interest in imposing martial law, but it's out there. I'm getting lots and lots of emails. Here's an email just an hour ago. Quote, I'm hearing from an indirect credible source that POTUS, the president, will invoke the Insurrection Act this week, replace Mark Meadows and General Flynn, and Sidney Powell will be named as a special prosecutor on election fraud. The email asks me to check it out. I have no way of checking it out except to expose it and talk about it on The Durst Show. So let's talk about it. This is an issue in which I am genuinely an expert, without, blowing my own horn. I have written books and articles about national emergencies. I started writing about this in 1970 when I was a consultant to Pierre Trudeau and the Canadian government when they invoked the War Measures Act and suspended civil liberties for a time in Canada as the result of the murder of an ambassador and insurrections that were taking place in Quebec by the Quebec Liberation Group. I then wrote a series of articles about it. Could it happen here? What's the constitutional status? I've taught the subject, and I suspect I know more about it than any other constitutional law professor in America. If I don't, I'd love to hear from anybody else. But this is a subject I have been studying for years. I know it very, very well. And I want to assure every listener and viewer there is absolutely no authority in the Constitution for the president to invoke martial law. Period. End of sentence, end of paragraph, end of book. There is no such authority. The power of the president in the Constitution is clearly set out and limited, and there is no reference to martial law. The framers knew about martial law. Governors had declared martial law throughout the history of the colonies, and we know that there was talk of martial law, but there is no authority to invoke martial law, certainly no authority by the president. In fact, the only two provisions that even come close to relating to emergencies are not in Article 2 of the Constitution that involve the power of the president. The only thing that's in Article 2 that is in any way, in my view, relevant would be, he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Well, yeah. That's his job as the executive, but it doesn't mean that he can be above the law or say, I'm going to suspend the law. Now, the Constitution does provide, but interestingly enough, it's in Article 1, not Article 2, that is powers of Congress. The Constitution does provide that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. And it doesn't say the president can suspend the writ of habeas corpus. It's under the powers of Congress to do so. And the best interpretation is if the writ is going to be suspended, it should be suspended by the joint approval of the president and the Congress, with the ultimate approval of the United States Supreme Court. When Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus during the Civil War, the Supreme Court in Ex parte Milligan basically overruled him, overruled President Lincoln. And so there's just no authority in the Constitution for in any way declaring martial law. Now, the states' governors have the authority to declare martial law under state constitutions. I mean, the only other provision of the Constitution that could be arguably relevant is in Article 4, where it says, the United States, not the president, the United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government. It's interesting that Republican is capitalized in the Constitution, but it obviously doesn't mean Republican in the partisan sense, since there was no Republican Party. A Republican Party was established in 1860 by Abraham Lincoln. A Republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion. Well, that's obvious. We need the federal government to protect against invasion. We don't want every state to have its own army and navy and air force. And this part is interesting. And on application of the legislature, or the executive when the legislature cannot be convened. In other words, the executive comes second. It's the fallback position. It's the legislature who decides, shall protect against domestic violence. Well, voting is not domestic violence. We've had a vote. There's a dispute about the vote. Okay. File a lawsuit. You did. You filed a lawsuit in the Supreme Court, and the Trump administration lost that lawsuit with 3 justices appointed by President Trump voting against the Trump administration. That doesn't mean that's the end of the matter. That was only an issue of standing. The case is still pending in Pennsylvania. There's still opportunities to bring lawsuits. There are plenty of legal recourses available to the president. But I have to tell you, some of the radicals on the left and some of the Democrats are encouraging this call for martial law. Why? Because they're saying the president shouldn't bring lawsuits. The president shouldn't bring legislative challenges. The president shouldn't bring challenges in Congress. And that says, to somebody, all right, if the president can't do that, what can he do? Well, martial law. No. Both sides are wrong here. The Democrats are wrong, and the media is wrong when they criticize bringing lawsuits. That's the way we deal with conflict in America. That's the way we decide conflicting issues. We decide them not on the streets, not by declaring martial law. We decide them by going to court or going to the legislature or having elections. That's the way democracy works. There's nothing more undemocratic than martial law. You know, martial law is a direct contradiction in terms. If it's martial, it isn't law. And if it's law, it isn't martial. Martial means the military controls. So you really can't have martial law. You have martial taking away of the law. Martial law was declared in Hawaii by the governor of Hawaii with the approval of the United States, because it was a territory at the time. Martial law was declared after Pearl Harbor for a period of time, and it was a disaster. It was a disaster. The governor of Hawaii ruled like a monarch, not the military, but the governor ruled like a monarch. It was terrible. Detained many, many people without any kind of writ of habeas corpus. The cases ultimately went to court and were resolved, but that was not a paradigm about how democracy should operate. And certainly never in the history of the United States has martial law or the Insurrection Act or any of these extra legal mechanisms ever been invoked to challenge an election. No. Can you imagine President Clinton declaring martial law to protest Bush versus Gore, which to my mind was a lawless decision? I wrote a whole book about it called Supreme Injustice, railing against the 5-member Republican majority that stole the election from Al Gore And they never would have done it had the shoe been on the other foot, had it been Gore versus Bush rather than Bush versus Gore, and had it been Gore, who had won the election by 500 votes and Bush were challenging it, the justices would have decided the case differently. I'm not one who is above criticizing the Supreme Court. I criticize the Supreme Court. I criticize the motive of the justices. We're entitled to do that in a democracy. But what no president should do, and I commend President Trump for denying and hopefully putting an end to any discussion of martial law, the Insurrection Act, or any kind of suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. By the way, even if the writ of habeas corpus was suspended, remember at the time the Constitution was written, we didn't really have appeals. The legal system was pretty primitive. The writ of habeas corpus was borrowed from Great Britain. It was called the Great Writ. It was the symbol of judicial authority over executive actions. Today, we have many writs beyond the writ of habeas corpus. Even if a president were to try to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, somebody could bring a declaratory judgment action, somebody could bring an injunctive action, somebody could bring an action at law, an action in equity. You don't need the writ of habeas corpus. It would be a terrible, terrible thing to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, but it wouldn't put our legal system out of business. It wouldn't end the role of the judiciary. So, my friends, my listeners, my viewers, rest easy. There will be no martial law declared. There will be no invocation of the Insurrection Act. There will be no suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. The lawsuits will go on. God bless them. Let them go on. There is nothing wrong with bringing lawsuits. There is nothing wrong with challenging the election in the legislature. That's what democracy requires. The rule of law. Take the Constitution out. Read the Constitution. If the Constitution says you can challenge an election in the House of Representatives or in the Senate. It's very hard to do, but you can try it. On January 6th or whatever, the president of the Senate, obviously Vice President Pence, will call for the reading of the electoral votes from the various states that have already confirmed the victory of Joe Biden. And then a number of congressmen will object, as they can, under the law, under the Constitution and under the Electoral College Act. They can protest. And under the law, if they get one member of Congress and one member of the Senate, then each chamber convenes separately. They have a debate. Everybody is allowed 5 minutes under the rules of the Senate and the House, if I'm not mistaken. And then a vote is taken. They report back to the joint session, and the vice president then declares the vote to be valid. If that happens, hey, it's a lesson in civics. Don't complain. Radicals, leftists, Democrats, partisans, don't complain when the other side takes advantage of our legal system and our political system. It's a lot better than martial law. It's a lot better than the Insurrection Act. So understand what democracy means. What democracy means is you vote, you challenge the vote, you challenge the challenges to the vote, you bring cases to the Supreme Court, you bring cases to the state legislature, you bring challenges to Congress, all acceptable, all part of our Constitution and legal system. But you don't invoke martial law, because that's not law. That's martial. That's military. You don't invoke, somebody once said, martial law is to law as martial music is to music. I never liked that, because I like martial music. I like bands. A friend of mine, Telford Taylor, used to compose music, martial music. He was a general, and it was great music. So I like martial music. I don't like martial law. We've never had it in the United States over an election. We've never had the federal government try to invoke martial law, and we shouldn't do it now. So continue the protest. You know my view. My view is that the president is entitled, if he honestly believes in his heart that this was an unfair election, he's entitled not to concede. What I hope he does, and what I think many people now hope he does, is he should come to the inauguration. He should sit quietly. He should hand over the office of presidency from himself to the new president. He should show the world that we believe in peaceful transition. And then if he wants to announce his candidacy for 2014, fine. And then if he wants to leave and say, this election was stolen from me, fine. As long as he's there symbolically, I think it will be good for him. First of all, I'm not sure that he will steal the center attention from everybody. If he shows up at the inauguration, that's going to be where a lot of attention is focused. Oh my God, Trump came to the inauguration. Isn't that interesting? So, President Trump knows how to get the limelight. And this is one way to do it. And this is one way to do it that would be good for America, good for democracy, and it would send out a powerful message. We are not a country that invokes martial law in protest to an election. We are not a banana republic. We are not a non-democratic. We are not China. We are not Russia. We are not Iran. We are not Belarus. We are not Venezuela. We are the United States of America. We've had many, many, many elections. We've had 40 some odd presidents of the United States. We've had close to 50 transitions of presidents of the United States. Let's do this in an orderly fashion. If you don't like it, get ready to vote again in 2024. The election campaign season for 2024 is only 3 years away. I'm 82. That's a long time for somebody who's 82. But for those of you who are much younger, it's a blink in the time of history. Get ready. Fight the next battle. Bring challenges. No martial law. No insurrection act. No giving power to the military. Sorry, General Flynn, on this one, you're wrong. And I know that President Trump has agreed that you're wrong on this one. And let's move forward. Let's move forward within the rule of law, not outside the rule of law. And let's remember that in the United States, it's this little book, the Constitution of the United States, the longest enduring constitution in the history of humankind. And the reason it's so enduring is that it has the flexibility to deal with crises, with unanticipated situations, with perfect storms like we have now. COVID, new strains of COVID, vaccines, the economy, people who want to declare a martial law, people who are aggrieved. The Constitution will deal with it. The Constitution is our authority. And I'm pleased that President Trump has indicated that he does not want to invoke any of these extraordinary measures. So let's get back to normalcy. Let's get back to constitutional authority, the rule of law. We've survived so many years under this Constitution and the rule of law. Let's not let one contested election ruin it. So you've heard my point of view on martial law, on insurrection, on a range of issues. It excites the passions of everybody. This is an election that nobody is neutral about. So now I want to hear your views about these and other issues on The Durst Show. Our first call today is from New York. Caesar.
After listening once again to New York State Attorney General Letitia James, who said even before she got into office that she was targeting President Trump. The Manhattan DA also seems to be targeting President Trump, whether there are legitimate investigatory reasons or not, I don't know. But what I wanted to ask you is it legal and or ethical for a prosecutor, a state attorney general, to say they're targeting a particular person? I've often heard that quote of yours from the, now I'm not likening them to the Soviet Union, but saying that, you show me the person and I'll create the crime. I must read 30 to 40 press releases from the Justice Department every week, and very often problems with corporations are just settled with a fine and other measures, and they don't target the individual. So please tell me, is it legal and is it ethical?
That's a great question. It is certainly not ethical, according to my view. No prosecutor should ever run for office basically on a bill of attainder. What is a bill of attainder? It's prohibited by the Constitution. A bill of attainder is when you target one particular individual through the legislature. And here you have people running for office saying, I'm running for office in order to get so-and-so. In one case, it was to get Donald Trump. In Philadelphia, it was to get Bill Cosby. In other cases around the country, you've seen prosecutors run on, I'll get so-and-so. Prosecutors who run on that should be disqualified. They shouldn't be allowed to prosecute. They should be recused. And therefore, it should be illegal. And so I hope if there were to be a prosecution of anybody who was targeted that way, the issue would be raised and be taken to the courts. Look, this raises a more fundamental issue. No prosecutor should ever be elected. We should not elect prosecutors. The idea of people running for office and then running for re-election by having notches in their belt. Oh, I prosecuted successfully 1,000 people, 100 people, 200 people. Prosecutors should be a professional civil service job, as it is in almost every other Western democracy. We may be the only Western democracy that elects prosecutors and elects judges. It's a terrible system, started by Andrew Jackson under a kind of Jacksonian democracy where everybody was elected, from dog catcher to public defender. You've heard me on this show before say in Florida, the public defender is elected. Can you imagine the campaign for public defender? Candidate A says, I'm running for public defender. I'm going to defend all the criminals. I went to Harvard Law School. I took all of Dershowitz's classes. He taught me every trick of the trade, how to make sure I get every murderer, robber, rapist acquitted. If you vote for me, the streets will be filled with murderers, robbers, and rapists. So vote for me for public defender. His opposing candidate said, I went to Joe's law school and bait shop, not certified. I don't know anything about the law. I'm incompetent. If you elect me to be your public defender, no one will get acquitted. The streets will be safe. Who would you vote for? It's absurd to have a public defender elected. That shouldn't be something the public decides. It should be a professional job given to the most competent person. The same thing is true with prosecutor. Let's turn now to our next question.
The other day, you mentioned ethics. You mentioned medical ethics. You even gave some credence to legal ethics. But when it came to journalistic ethics, you indicated that that was an oxymoronic idea. My question to you is that oxymoronic because of the nature of what is increasingly at least a free press, as we know it in the United States, increasingly theoretic free press, or was that an indictment of the subjectivity of our free press here in the United States? Thanks again for your show. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Look, I appreciate your question. The answer is no, it's not just the subjectivity. There's one thing when newspapers lean hard right or hard left. That's not my complaint about lack of ethics of journalists. Journalists care about one thing themselves. They want to promote themselves. They want to win prizes. They want to get headlines. They want to get bylines. I have never met a more selfish group of individuals in my professional life, never, than journalists. I'm not saying every journalist. I'm not saying all journalists. But if you ask me to group together one profession, it's not a profession. You don't have to be licensed. You don't have to pass a test. You don't have to know how to write an English sentence. The profession, quote, of journalism is the least ethical of every profession I've ever encountered. I've seen more lies, more deception, more self-dealing, and there are no codes of ethics for journalists. When you have a complaint about a journalist, what do? You send it to their newspaper and they cover for them. So it's appalling. And it's not about right-left. It's about corruption. It's about how corrupt individual journalists are. They want to just do it for themselves. And they owe nothing to anybody else. I may be overzealous about this, but I have to tell you, I've been around a long time, dealing with journalists a long time, dealing with lawyers, dealing with doctors, dealing with priests and rabbis. I have complaints about every institution in America. There are a lot of unethical lawyers. There are a lot of unethical doctors. But I have to tell you, I've never met a group, as a group, that seems to lack ethics as much as journalists. And I'm sorry about that. It's appalling because journalists are part of our system of checks and balances. And unless they get some ethics, unless they get a code of conduct, unless there's somebody you can report them to. I've had so many experiences with journalists who've just looked me in the eye and just lied to me directly and felt no guilt about it whatsoever. And I'm trying to bring some of them to account. I am suing CNN. I am suing Netflix. And I will sue any other. I never had a lawsuit in my life until I was 75 years old. Never a lawsuit in my life. I never sued anybody. I was never sued. My insurance for malpractice was almost zero. I'd never been challenged. Never. Now I'm spending my life suing. And I'm going to continue to do it because I'm part of the system of checks and balances too. I'm going to be checking CNN, Netflix, and others. Just give you an example from Netflix. The director of the series about Jeffrey Epstein looked me in the eye and said, Alan, I'm on your side. I want to tell your story. I believe you. I don't believe the woman who has accused you. I want to give you every opportunity to present your side. If you give me your evidence, I promise you, I will put all your evidence on the air. I will put on the air your tape recording of David Boies admitting that she's wrong, simply wrong. I'll put her emails admitting she never met you on the air. I'll put her book manuscript admitting she saw you once but never met you. I will put the FBI report, the former FBI director, on the air. Looked me in the eye and swore to me, broke every single promise. And I'm going to be suing her as the result of that. CNN deliberately and willfully took out the words illegal and unlawful from my statement on the floor of the Senate to make it sound like I was saying a president can do anything illegal or unlawful, even though just a few words earlier, I said a president can't do anything that's illegal and unlawful, and spent 67 minutes on the floor of the Senate saying a president can be impeached if he does anything illegal or unlawful, if it's a high crime and misdemeanor. And CNN willfully, deliberately, knowingly doctored the tape in order to have me say things different from what I'm saying. So if you complain about me generalizing about journalistic ethics, understand that it grows out of a lot of experience. And I don't want to generalize. There are ethical journalists, but boy, I've never met a group that has so many unethical journalists as so many unethical people as journalists who are seeking headlines and bylines and promotions and Pulitzer Prizes. And the worst thing is the Pulitzer Committee sometimes gives the Pulitzer Prize or considers for the Pulitzer Prize people like that. Julie Brown, for example, the woman who wrote the one-sided, extraordinarily unethical articles about the Epstein matter for the Miami Herald, was considered for a Pulitzer Prize. I wrote to the Pulitzer Committee laying out all the things she omitted from her journalism, and she didn't get the Pulitzer Prize for that year. I hope I played a role in that, and I will continue to play a role and write about journalists who engage in this kind of result-oriented, unethical journalism. So that's my take today on journalism. If you don't agree, call me. Let me know. I want to hear from you. Thanks. Let's turn now to our next call.
I'm just a guy from Florida, an independent. Love just listening to your show with Viva. I've been following Barnes and Viva and all the people I fear for this country, just like you do. When's the Bar Association going to get their act together? How do we have a new Bar Association? Unfortunately, I'm afraid to leave my name.
Well, you shouldn't be afraid to leave your name, but I understand it. Well, thank you for mentioning the Viva show. I had a great time on that show. David is unbelievable. He's a terrific host, and please, people, watch that show as well, and watch the Der show. You asked about new bar associations. It's a problem. I filed bar complaints against David Boies for very, very serious misconduct. And, in my case, lawyers knowingly put on perjured testimony. They knew it. Boies told me she was wrong, simply wrong. And yet after he said that, his client got on the witness stand and swore to the contrary under oath. Bradley Edwards has said that he knows for sure that Virginia Giuffre never did anything wrong with Leslie Wexner, and yet she testified that he did. And bar associations just don't do a good enough job of regulating the ethics of their lawyers. But at least we have bar associations. Journalists don't have comparable associations to which legitimate complaints can be brought. Oh, there are committees and commissions. There's the Columbia School of Journalism, but they don't really do a job. And the bar associations should be doing a better job of monitoring their lawyers and making sure that they comply with the highest standard of ethics. Our next call is from Harold.
Can the state legislators in the disputed states call a special session or some other mechanism to decide to reject the current electors that are assigned to Biden and reject these such that they would either not be assigned to anybody or to be assigned to Donald Trump? Is that the main issue here? If it takes it under 270, then I know the mechanism that would be put into place. But if they are put towards, do they have the power to do that, is my question. Simply by a majority vote of the state legislators. Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me focus on the 270. The 270 is only the number if all the states send all their electors. The Constitution talks about a majority of the electors chosen. So if a state says we're not going to send any electors, the number 270 goes down probably. You know, this has never been tested. It's just that seems to be the logical reading. The Constitution says the electors shall be chosen in a manner decided by the state legislature. We don't know what that means. We don't know whether a state legislature could withdraw the votes of the voters and substitute their own electors. I doubt the courts would sustain that or tolerate that, but there's no indication in the Constitution one way or the other. Remember, when the Constitution was enacted, the legislatures had complete power. They could not have presidential elections. They could just select the electors and pick them based on their own preferences. But we've come a long way. And we now have amendments to the Constitution that explicitly refer to presidential elections. Whether those amendments change the power of the legislatures, I don't know. It's not going to happen. Legislatures are not going to rescind the votes of the voters and substitute their own electors or call for another special election. It's not going to happen. If it did happen, the courts would probably not permit it, certainly not after the election has already occurred, absent the most compelling evidence of massive fraud. So it's an interesting hypothetical, but ain't going to happen. Our next call is from Howard in Kansas.
I was thinking more about the possible mandatory vaccines for employers and employees. And I was wondering if it looks like we probably reach herd immunity with people that want to take the vaccine. Would there be any kind of a court case that might go through that says you still have to take it to go to work?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is the courts will probably be sensible. If we do achieve herd immunity, and you don't need medically more people getting the vaccine, then I suspect courts would say you can't compel the vaccine if there's no public health need for it. You might get a court saying, well, how about equal protection? If I had to take the vaccine, why don't you take the vaccine? And speaking of equal protection, I was curious. I don't know if you were, but AOC got the vaccine. She's 30 years old, healthy. I wasn't sure. Why do Congress people, 28, 30, 35-year-old healthy Congress people, get the vaccine before nursing home patients who are 85? I was just surprised to see that Congress, or whoever it was, the president, the administration, allocated to young, healthy, elected officials priority over older, more vulnerable people. So if any of you know the answer to that question, I'd be interested in hearing about it. I'm glad that AOC and Vice President Pence and President-elect Biden are all taking the vaccine and taking it publicly on television to send a message to people that it's safe and effective. I hope it is safe and effective, and I hope people will want to take it. So I hope we will never have to reach the issue of compelled vaccination. But if we do, the issue will be decided upon whether it's a public health need or not. Nobody's going to make you take a vaccine for your own good. The only constitutional basis for making you accept medical treatment of any kind, vaccination or otherwise, is to prevent the spread to others, or if you're a child or incompetent, etc. So I hope we won't need to have mandatory vaccines. Our last question today is from Donald in Washington.
I would like to know if there is any way we can hold local, state, and federal officials to account when they swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of our country and don't do so.
Well, that's interesting. Swearing to uphold the Constitution is an oath that you take politically, but there's nothing in the Constitution that provides a remedy for it. For example, it is not an impeachable offense, in my view, to violate your oath. The Constitution could have made it, because the oath's in the Constitution. The Constitution could have said any president who violates the oath is impeachable. They didn't say that. They said treason, bribery, other high crimes, and misdemeanors. So they didn't make the violation of the oath a ground for impeachment, and it's not a ground for criminal conduct. It's a ground for voting against people. Look, there are certain violations of the Constitution that probably are unlawful, but the oath itself carries nothing more than a symbolic effect. I guess you could be indicted for perjury if you took the oath on the Bible, and in your mind at the time you took the oath, you knew you were going to violate the oath. That could be perjury, but that would have to be charged by a state authority. It's never been done. I doubt it will be done. What great questions today. I mean, really covering a range of issues, allowing me to rail against my journalistic nemesis, allowing me to talk about bar associations and vaccines. I love this part of the show. I love the wits that's added to the Der Show. So please keep adding wits to the Der Show. Keep calling and keep me on my toes. I want to make sure that if you have criticisms, you make your criticisms known, because that's the purpose of the Der Show. And please call me with questions and comments and criticisms that you have of me and the show. The number is 216-710-0050. 216-710-0050. Call me. I really want to hear what you have to say. You provide the wits that completes the Der Show wits.